Welcome, history buffs and casual binge-watchers alike, to a journey fraught with labor, grime, and ineffable misfortune. Yes, it's Why You Wouldn't Last a Day in the Roman Empire, where the only thing more epic than the architecture is the unholy misery of its denizens. Picture this. You open your front door to find a 1,000-square-mile urban hellscape, where good luck finding a decent place to live and an even better chance of dodging a flying piece of pottery hurled by a disgruntled neighbor. Are you ready for some real talk? The Roman Empire wasn't just a capsule of marble columns, gladiatorial games, and toga parties. It was also an elaborate mess of staggering class divides and innumerable ways to suffer if your last name wasn't Caesar. We'll explore the gritty living conditions of the common folk who had as much chance of upward mobility as a chicken at a Roman banquet. Spoiler alert, they weren't sitting at the table. Medical care? More like, let's throw herbal tea at it and hope for the best. And don't even get me started on justice. If you thought Judge Judy was tough, just wait until you hear about the Roman magistrates who ruled like they were playing a game of Guess How Merciful I'm Not. But hold on to your laurel wreaths, because it's not all doom and gloom. Amid the appalling living conditions were some of the most astonishing contributions to law, public engineering, and art that the world has ever seen. Who else could make a villa look like $1 million while their neighbors starved? Yet, the irony is thick enough to cut with a gladius, as we delve into the sheer absurdity of a civilization that perfected the arch while ignoring a pug's life expectancy. Each story will leave you laughing, cringing, and possibly rethinking how you define civilization. After all, if they could build aqueducts with one hand and accidentally crush a civil uprising with the other, what does that say about progress? So tune in to discover why surviving a day in the Roman Empire would have you crying for your mama and longing for modernity like a gladiator seeking refuge in an air-conditioned Colosseum. Because it's one thing to admire the Romans from afar, but living with them? Now, that's a historical episode that bites back. Cue the melodramatic fanfare. The year, 64 AD. The place, Rome, a bustling amphitheater of debauchery, political scheming, and the complex art of not getting stabbed in the back, preferably not literally. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafts through the Roman Forum, mingling with the less savory scent of ambitious senators turning into shifty proprietors, lacing everyday loaf with the paranoia of potential uprising. Here we find Gluttonius Maximus, the imperial baker famed for his bread with a crunch that could rival political scandals. His handlebar mustache twitches in delight as he observes the throngs of citizens who flock like pigeons toward his bakery, as if crispy rolls were the keys to eternal glory rather than mere carbs. The scene is bustling, a hodgepodge of men, women, and far too enthusiastic children reach for the elusive golden crust, while the sound of clanking pots and raised voices echoes in the background. Between the wheeling and dealing, it's clear. In Rome, bread isn't just food. It's a form of currency, a tool of social stratification, and potentially a weapon should you find yourself in a particularly spicy argument. Just when you think the chaos can't escalate, enter the oven of suspicion, a behemoth of brick and fire that doubles as Gluttonius's throne of anxiety. Bread isn't merely baked here, It is a communal rite with elaborate rituals steeped in superstition. Citizens can barely bide their time without consulting the resident soothsayer. Because who could risk biting into a loaf baked under an ill-fated sign? Picture this. The flour dust hangs in the air like premonitions of doom as Glutonius waits, taking calculated risks, tossing grains into a sizzling mix amid murmurs of reviews that can redefine or derail a career. Every loaf he produces requires approval from an exclusive committee of disgruntled house moms and retired gladiators. They stand poised with astute judgment and a penchant for sarcasm, critiquing everything from crust size to whether the dough contains a hint of poison note to self. Avoid unfortunate family feuds. One day, wildcard Vespasian, a senator known for preferring pastry to politics, comes to inspect the bread of justice, a recent addition purported to grant wisdom to those who partake. The atmosphere grows thick with tension. You could slice it with a hot breadstick. When he takes a bite, the room collectively holds its breath. One crumb, one chance to silence the political rivals. Will it elevate his standing or send him to an early demise? Upon swallowing, Vespasian's face contorts. Was it ecstasy? Or had he unwittingly bitten into a metaphysical black hole? A terrible truth becomes apparent. This bread tastes like taxes, he declares dramatically, creating a ripple of uproar that could have rivaled the Colosseum in its zeal. Chaos ensues. The disgruntled baking committee morphs into a gaggle of disgruntled critics, accusing Glutonius of treason. Are you in league with the grain merchants of Galilee? One screams, while another claims, I knew it was the wheat, that suspiciously golden hue. Glutonius's glorious bread is left to smolder, a testament to the ephemeral nature of cream and crust. Eventually, the baker is exonerated when an untimely rat is discovered, unknowingly promoting the great cheese bread war over the offensive loaf. Guilt falls swiftly upon Vespasian when the cheese brokers rejoice. The cheese flew off the shelves, making everyone forget the tax scandal. Lesson learned. It's often the least dangerous ingredient that strikes panic into the hearts of men. Thus, we learn. Bread can stoke revolution. But cheese can incite a new world order. Welcome to ancient Rome, circa 75 BC, a time when sandals were fashionable. The Mediterranean was a great place to get fish, and the local diet might just kill you faster than a gladiatorial match. Picture yourself in a colossal amphitheater where the scent of grilled meat mingles with the ever-present whiff of sweat and intrigue, causing your stomach to rumble ominously. The sun blazes down on this chaotic scene, where every citizen is pondering a critical question: what's for lunch? And if you think the answer is pizza, prepare to be sorely disappointed. Enter our protagonist, Gaius Maximus Carnivorus, a well-built Roman citizen whose only real job is to look good in a toga and consume bread, because who needs protein when you can have carbs? With the thrumming of distant cheers, cheering for either the lions winning or the humans losing, the atmosphere hangs heavy with anticipation and flour dust. The centerpiece of this culinary catastrophe? Panis, a humble loaf of bread that boasts the same consistency as a brick. In fact, Roman bread makers took less pride in quality and more in artistic expression, occasionally adding ingredients like moldy rye, not-so-fresh weeds, and suspiciously fermented dough to give their loaf that authentic taste of uncertainty. Yet, in what could either be a show of sheer stupidity or tragically misguided faith, the populace believed that food could indeed be an offering to the gods. They engaged in absurd rituals. Before eating, one family would don their best togas and perform a dramatic, interpretive dance around their dinner table, all while chanting, "Hail Bacchus, god of wine and not-so-good decisions." So, you can imagine my surprise when their ancient priest suddenly decided that bread might harbor spirits and sprinkled it with a combination of barley wine. You know, just in case a god got thirsty. The tension rises as Gauls invade this sacred slab of dough, bringing with them suspicious spices and potential culinary threats. The sorry slice of bread becomes a battlefield in the great war of carbohydrates versus carbohydrates. Perhaps the most horrifying superstition of all? The belief that if you ever saw a crumb on the ground, it was the spirit of a fallen soldier waiting to exact revenge. Oh, the horror! Talk about an unsavory meal. Just when you think this dietary debacle couldn't get any worse, a twist of irony ensues. One fateful afternoon, Gaius, eager to assert his digestive superiority, decides to host an extravagant feast. He enlists his half-baked friends, who relish the opportunity to fall into gastronomic despair alongside him. The main dish? A centerpiece loaf so large it required an exorcist to bless it. The moment came for Gaius to slice into the loaf. The crowd gasped, part in awe and part in sheer terror. Bits of rock? Check. Unidentifiable whiteness? Double check. And where the heck was that smell coming from? Just as he was about to pass out from the fumes, Zeus himself descended. Well, it was probably just a guy in a toga dressed as Zeus, but no matter. He bellowed, "You dare desecrate the great gods of the pantheon with this abomination?" Seized by panic, Gaius quickly offered up a prayer, inadvertently dropping the ceremonial olive oil needed to garnish the loaf. And thus concluded the apocalypse of the bread. The loaf exploded into a cloud of floury devastation, sending patrons scrambling in every direction. Gaius learned a valuable lesson that day. Even when the bread does bring the gods down to dinner, they might just order takeout. And the takeaway from this historical debacle? Next time you think about indulging in a loaf of bread, consider whether your pantry might be harboring the spirit of a long-lost gourmand ready to haunt your culinary choices. The year is 50 BC. The location? A lavishly adorned Roman villa where decadence is as common as a toga, and dinner parties are basically auditions for who gets to survive until tomorrow. The aroma of opulent delicacies wafts through the air. A strange mix of roasted quail, exotic spices, and something distinctly questionable. Is that a hint of eucalyptus? No. It's definitely the lingering odor of panic from a last-minute menu decision involving dormice. That's right, the centerpiece of tonight's feast is dormice. Those unfortunate little rodents that, back in Roman times, went from being underfoot vermin to the culinary equivalent of a celebrity chef's secret ingredient. And who better to serve this questionable delicacy than the evening's charming host, Marcus Caecilius, a man whose idea of hospitality ends where your gag reflex begins? As our scene unfolds, we find Marcus shining under the dim candlelight, decked in all the finery a Roman could muster, a toga so delicate it almost swayed away like autumn leaves. His guests, a mix of senators, philosophers, and the rare self-aware comedian, settle in, their eyes glistening not with anticipation but with a gnawing fear of what awaited on their plates. With an air of triumph, Marcus dramatically unveils the dish, a platter of glazed dormice, presented on a bed of barley and sprinkled with honey. Applause erupts, bordering on an existential crisis as one senator accidentally drops his wine in shock. And then comes the moment of truth. Each guest is tasked with deciding between rapture in a culinary achievement and reconsidering their life choices. As forks hover hesitantly over the glistening rodents, the tension thickens quicker than a gladiator's bicep. Consume them sparingly, cackles an ancient philosopher with a twinkle in his eye that screams trouble. For they say, if one is unduly bold, the dormouse shall haunt your dreams. Yes, superstition in Rome isn't just a casual affair. It's a full-time job. According to popular belief, dormice were reputed to be chattels of Pluto, the god of the underworld. So, good luck digesting your dinner when you're halfway to Hades. But the absurdity doesn't stop there, as stories of folks going mad after indulging in these furry morsels flood the room, igniting panic among the delicate palates. One senator even recalls a rumor that a fellow diner at a past feast felt compelled to reenact the story of the Trojan horse while hyperventilating. Cue the melodrama. As forks plunge, there's silence followed by a comedic symphony of chewing sounds and muffled grumbles. Marcus, reveling in the spectacle, smiles as though he's just bestowed the imperial crown on his guests. Not a plate of highly questionable cuisine. Irony peaks when the physician, tasked with entertaining through medical anecdotes, turns pale at the sight and murmurs, "A wise man once told me to never trust food that comes with a disclaimer." And just when it seems that the guests are about to descend into culinary chaos, there's a dramatic twist. A local chicken farmer burst through the doors declaring that their dormouse supply had mysteriously dwindled due to massive nocturnal excitement, leading to thoughts of rat conspiracies. The guests gasp in unison as the rumor spreads that these particular dormice cultivated a taste for rom-com humans and were now seeking revenge. The absurdity reaches a crescendo, and folks start loudly protesting against the conspiracy that was apparently already known. So Marcus, ever the peacemaker, quickly shifts to ordering a delightful cheese platter, an act of mercy disguised as a sudden alignment with cheese-loving deities. In truth, purchasing and preparing dormice was a Roman culinary tradition that blended extravagance with risk, demonstrating that sometimes ambitious dining leads to empty plates and full gossip columns. So, what did we learn from this? Always check if your dinner is ready to retire, or if it's simply waiting to make you a legend in your own lunch hour. Because nobody goes home when the dormouse starts gossiping. Welcome to the height of the Roman Empire, circa AD 20, where our tale unfolds in Rome's raucously perfumed streets as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of burnt sienna and regret. The citizens cry out not for help, but for pasta. Yes, that great cultural import from across the Mediterranean. Now, serving as both diner's delight and potential poison. The atmosphere? Oh, it's a veritable melange of sights and sounds. The distant music of lyres, the tantalizing aroma of spiced garlic wafting from the tavern kitchens, and the unmistakable echoes of public bathhouses nearby, reminding everyone that while your dinner might be delicious, you definitely need a wash. The die-hard local citizens, dressed in tunics that cling precariously to their waistlines, bristle with anticipation as tonight's special is served up on ancient Roma's finest ceramic plates. In the central square, we meet our protagonist, Gaius, a citizen so desperate to impress his wealthy relatives that he has orchestrated a feast unlike any other, complete with a monumental pasta dish dubbed the Don't You Dare Poison This. My relatives are watching spaghetti. As Gaius stirs the bubbling cauldron, it's essential to note that every piece of pasta is meticulously crafted to resemble a noodle from the famed chef Apicius, though in reality, it's questionable whether Apicius was ever on the same side of the culinary tracks as Gaius. But here's where things take a raucous turn. Apart from the excessive garum, a fermented fish sauce that cried out for mercy, the pasta itself carries the weight of family honor, or what remains of it. You see, Gaius is in the midst of a clandestine campaign to restore familial prestige, and nothing says influence quite like a dish that could either lead to a banquet or your untimely demise. Imagine the tension escalating as Gaius sweats profusely over his sauce. He remembers tales of foodborne betrayal from the Senate. Legends abound of great men who fell over undercooked ravioli at a banquet. In a fit of paranoia, he summons his girlfriend Julia, who holds the honorary title of Chief Pasta Inspector, responsible for taste testing every batch to ensure no bloody vendetta is simmering beneath the surface. As Julia pauses over the steaming pot, she holds an olive branch of caution, spiced with fear. You know that Cousin Marcus is rumored to have a secret ambition as your replacement, right? Could be a poisoned noodle, just saying. As she stirs the pot, you can practically hear the scales of justice tip. Will it be culinary triumph or a fortuitous family funeral? And just as she's about to take a bite, the kitchen assistant drops a wheel of cheese which catapults into the air and lands with a plop right in the pasta pot. Cue the gasp heard around Rome. The entirety of the city pauses as they brace for impact. The cheese, clotted and trembling, creates a wave of chaotic nostalgia. It's Nutella all over again, catastrophic and sticky. Will this revolting innovation ruin Gaius's reputation forever? He winces as Julia craves a flavorful bite, anticipated as if Hercules was right about to lift the weight of their family's humiliation. As she takes that bite, the court holds its collective breath, tasteless, too salty, or infamously greasy. After a power pause, she exclaims, "This is neither foul nor fatal. Eat it, everyone." And just like that, the pasta becomes the talk of the town. So there you have it. A family settled on a plate, honor restored, and no food poisonings were reported that day. And what's our takeaway from this noodle odyssey? It's simple. So long as you've got friends willing to taste the dregs of desperation, you might just survive your family's expectations. But for the love of Caesar, always watch out for a rogue cheese wheel. Cue the dramatic music. The year, 59. BC. The setting, a sun-drenched atrium in Rome, where the scent of roasting meat mingles uncomfortably with the fragrance of a very determined toga party. The air is thick, not just with the aroma of a suspiciously large fowl hanging from a skewer, but with the anticipation of watching a few dozen sophisticated Romans systematically ruin their dinner. Enter Gaius, the illustrious host with a penchant for ostentation, and a small fortune built on dubious trade agreements in silk and salt. Tonight, he's serving the pièce de résistance, a grandiloquent roast peacock. Not only was it a display of wealth, but the peacock also boasted the unique characteristic of being, well, overly elaborate. This isn't your Sunday family roast. This is a feathered phenomenon, plucked and presented so dramatically that it nearly steals the show from Gaius himself. Yet, in the heart of this lavish feast lies an ancient culinary secret, something the Romans took very seriously. The notion of no food should be left without a distinctive, grisly story attached to it. The guests gather around, sipping delightfully muddled wine, the recipe rumored to involve time travel, and they're about to partake in the comically ghastly ritual of sampling the fowl. As laughter and wine flow, so too does the tension. Will anyone survive this Epicurean endeavor? In ancient Rome, food wasn't just sustenance. It was a reflection of status, a possible murder weapon, and potentially a reason for a lifetime ban from the Senate. As the guests watch Gaius approach the banquet table, knife gleaming, they remember the terrible local superstition. Peacocks feed on poisoned seeds. Ah, but that's only if you're a food taster. Gaius gracefully plunges his knife into the peacock's breast and flips the carcass. Who knew that a seasoned warrior would be so adept at both conquest and butchery? With each upward stroke, tension crackles like a thunderbolt, as the contents of the peacock's stomach spill onto the platter like an ancient Roman horror show. Terrified gasps ripple through the dining hall. Gaius, however, looks unfazed. Perhaps the only man who can handle poultry and politics in equal measure. In this moment of horrifying revelation, one indignant philosopher, spilling wine from his goblet, suddenly declares, "It's not the stuffing that's dangerous, it's the profit margins." Suddenly, their meticulously prepared feast becomes a catalyst for all-out chaos. The crowd erupts in accusations of betrayal and subterfuge. One guest claims this is all a ploy by the senator from Placentia to ruin the festivities. Who could even confirm the peacock's pedigree? Surely it didn't come from the royal family's immaculate lineage. At the peak of absurdity, a highly skeptical poet in the corner scribbles verses summarizing their impending doom, while the chef insists it's simply well-seasoned. Anyone who had the misfortune of ingesting half the meat would find themselves in tumultuous debates faster than you could say Caesar salad. However, instead of suffering disastrous illnesses or grappling with fatal philosophical discussions, the guests discover another shock. The stuffing, made of a concoction that Gaius claimed bore the seal of the gods, was composed entirely of honeyed figs and boiled honey. It is prepared in such a way that neither the gods nor the locals would want any part of it. Yet, this revelation calms the party, at least in the sense that digestive problems could wait until after the last guest left. The peacock, once a harbinger of doom, becomes a festival of chewing and grumbling instead of spewing. Amidst the ruined decorum, everyone agrees to slug through the night armed with excessive wine. So, remember, when it comes to feasting in ancient Rome, beware of the peacock, but only if you can't handle the stuffing. Worse, if you can't figure out who has a vendetta against your taste buds. Q. The ominous trumpets. The year, 62. A.D. The place, an extravagant Roman banquet hall where the wine flows like propaganda, and the decor is a subtle blend of marble, gold, and the faint stench of regret. The air is heavy with the laughter of gluttons amidst the competing aromas of roasted peacock and an unfortunate pudding made of fermented fish guts, a delicacy that, much like your last Tinder date, is best left undiscovered. Enter Nero, the emperor whose penchant for drama makes Shakespeare look like an amateur. Sporting a toga that circles back to the glory of the sun itself, he surveys his assembly of sycophants and culinary warriors. Tonight's menu? A breathtaking buffet designed to put Mount Olympus to shame. But tonight's star dish was the pièce de résistance, a lavishly stuffed dormouse, because who wouldn't want to fight with their food before it's even on the plate? As if plucking a dormouse from the wild wasn't enough adventure, this particular culinary creation was generously stuffed with minced meat, spices, and a treasure trove of hidden horror. Many Roman cooks were known to take culinary risks that would make a Food Network chef faint. The dormouse was a metaphor for the Romans themselves, stuffed to the brim with excess yet still surprisingly unpalatable. A chorus of burps and groans erupts as guests dive into their food, only to come to an abrupt halt. You see, the banquet's success relied heavily on the special spice blend made from the rarest ingredients known to man: swift-moving slaves and the tears of conquered enemies. Legend had it that a single grain out of place, particularly a whiff of cumin misidentified as hemlock, could spell doom. Nero, always the dramatic character, began a performance that would have made Mel Gibson rethink his career choice. "Friends, Romans, countrymen," he declared, gesturing wildly with a half-eaten dormouse leg, "how many of you dare to taste the gourmet delights before us?" His audience, already a horde of overly enthusiastic eaters who treated food like gladiators treated swords, gasped in delight and fear. Suddenly, a faint scream echoed through the hall. Someone had bitten into something particularly chewy, an entire eyeball to be precise. Panic ensued. Vintage 62 AD. Wine flew as guests wrestled to rid themselves of the remnants of animal gore. As the ruckus peaked, the palace guards were called to action. But instead of leaping into heroic duty, they froze, watching their beloved emperor bellow outrageously. Disappointment turned to laughter when it was discovered that the supplier of the exotic dormouse was none other than the emperor's recently promoted cousin, the one with a penchant for terrible jokes and worse cooking. The poor guy was just looking for favor, and landed himself a Colosseum's worth of humiliation. Once calm returned to the banquet, a brave yet ill-advised soul called for a re-evaluation of the menu. The noble court had tasted fear. A sage, feeling remarkably bold, declared, "Well, it could have been worse. At least it wasn't the blood pudding." This caused another round of laughter as tongues loosened in the aftermath of fear, and a gladiator was heard muttering almost weakly, "I'll take my chances on the sword any day." Thus, what started as an evening of gastronomic extravagance turned into epic satire. Rome's hunger for extravagance had led to a menu that was hilariously dangerous, and everyone, including the emperor, was on the brink of culinary anarchy. In the end, dinner concluded with the survivors eyeing each other suspiciously, piecing together who could bring their own lunch to hearings on what is a dormouse. Circling back to the aftermath, news spread across the empire. Never trust a recipe whose main ingredient goes squish when cooked. So what's the moral here? Don't bite off more than you can chew, unless you enjoy being the punchline of history. Welcome to Rome in the year AD 39. The sun glistens ominously over the city, casting long shadows over the Colosseum, as if it too is hiding from the madness about to unfold. The clamor of merchants hawking dubious wares fills the air, mingling with the pungent aroma of grilled pigeon and what can only be described as questionable fish sauces, a culinary choice that would leave most modern foodies clutching their stomachs. Camera pans inside the banquet hall of Emperor Caligula, where opulence and insanity collide like two drunken gladiators at the end of a long night. Drenched in gold and overflowing with the spoils of conquest, the room is filled with senators trying to maintain their dignity, while Tiberius the Ticklish, Caligula's infamous court jester, prepares to perform a comedy routine that is actually just him shouting the emperor's name while doing cartwheels with a live chicken under his arm. You know, typical Roman dinner entertainment. The centerpiece is the evening's gastronomic masterpiece, a gigantic platter of boiled peacock. Yes, you heard that right, because nothing says imperial excess quite like serving birds that were once admired for their beauty, now tragically metamorphosed into a culinary experiment gone wrong. Unbeknownst to the guests, however, this dish carries the weight of Caligula's paranoia. For our dear emperor was under the impression that this dinner was no ordinary feast. It was an elaborate test of loyalty. And in this twisted game, he decided that any questionable ingredient could signify a betrayal. A hint of cinnamon? Sound the alarm. A dandelion leaf. The conspirators are upon us. Caligula's chefs stand nervously around the platter, trembling like disturbed quails, as they prepare to unleash the banquet upon the distinguished assembly, their hearts racing at the thought of being the next to meet a fate worse than recording a podcast on the downfall of an empire. As guests timidly begin to dig into the peacock, a distinct sound emerges, the distant patter of hooves approaching. Panic ensues. Could it be a rival? An assassin? Or merely another idle thought from Caligula's overactive imagination? The emperor rants about how each pluck from the flamboyant bird is akin to a stab in his back, leading guests to question if dinner was the right moment for such graphic analogies. The tension escalates as accusations fly faster than a Roman arrow. A senator, convinced it's poisoned, dramatically collapses, claiming he saw visions of his own funeral before spiraling toward the marble floor. Suddenly, a servant rushes in claiming a soothsayer predicted the calamity would strike unless the peacock was prepared a certain way, using honey from a bee that's been blessed by a priest. Naturally, this leads to widespread chaos and confusion. Honeybees are not on hand, nor are any priests, because Caligula had ordered them all arrested after the last ill-fated recommendation. It seems even ancient Rome had its red tape bureaucrats. Now, panicked and flustered beyond measure, Caligula resorts to consulting the chef, who sheepishly admits they neglected to consider that when cooking a peacock, it could be unpalatable. Cue the ensuing drama of Caligula shouting accusations of treachery while lambasting his chefs, who are now accused of culinary sabotage, as if they were concocting a plot over mere appetizers rather than aging wine. The climax arrives when, ultimately, the only thing exposed was that Caligula himself had an allergic reaction to peacock meat. The evening concludes with the emperor turning beet red and racing for the nearest latrine, his once regal demeanor replaced by utter humiliation, as the panicking senators dart after him, ensuring they are not next to be consigned to the porcelain throne of shame. Throughout history, food has wielded more influence than expected. In this case, it betrayed an emperor while turning a simple banquet into a farcical tragedy. Moral of the story? Always be cautious when partaking in imperial cuisine, because in the Roman Empire, dinner could just as easily spell doom. Picture it. Rome, 62 AD. The sun, burning bright like a particularly obnoxious lamp in a poorly decorated living room. The Forum is bustling with citizens who seem to have made it their personal mission to buy, sell, and argue about everything from olives to oratory. But on this day, the spectacle is even grander. It's the annual food festival, a gladiatorial contest of culinary proportions. As you stroll along the crowded pathways, the aromas hit you like a slap from a wet noodle. The scent of roasting meat, mingled with the occasionally rancid waft from the fish market. An olfactory experience that feels almost anthropological in its chaos. Shouts of vendors hawking fish sauce are interrupted only by the merry-sounding clink of gold coins being flung at equally confused pigs. But here's the kicker. Amidst all this locale, a gladiatorial showdown is not just with swords, but also with bowls, pots, and a good old-fashioned dose of overcooked pasta. Enter our protagonist, Gaius, a portly merchant with penchant for overindulgence and underperforming diets. His life's ambition? To win the grand prize of the festival, the coveted golden spoon of aloha, not historically accurate, but who's checking? Gaius, puffing in his tight toga, must face off against Marcus, a wiry artisan known for his legendary lentil stew. Livia, a woman whose famed fish pie has claimed the taste buds, and possibly the lives, of several local nobles. The stakes rise like a particularly stubborn soufflé as the gladiators of gastronomy take their places. Surrounding them are crowds of Romans, equally divided between eager anticipation and absolute horror. A trumpet blares, rather blunderingly, signaling the beginning. The first event, pie throwing. Yes, in an absurdly comedic twist of fate, competitors hurl lukewarm pies at each other while reciting questionable poetry about love and lemons. Nothing says ancient Rome like a good old spit of crust and cream. Gaius, whose aim can rival that of a drunken centurion, somehow manages to hit Marcus in the face. The crowd erupts into laughter, and the local political intrigues momentarily fade away. The second round, the infamous spaghetti dunking. As Gaius clumsily attempts to twirl a bowl's worth of noodles around his forks, he ends up in a noodle squabble with Livia, who is wielding her glorious fish pie like a medieval mace. It's a scene reminiscent of a toddler's birthday party gone horribly wrong. The sound of noodles slapping against the floor is oddly poetic in its absurdity. In a miraculous twist, Gaius's excess intake of wine, the only thing flowing faster than the wine, was the regret triggers a dramatic spaghetti explosion that covers a dozen spectators worse than a Roman bathhouse gone rogue. But wait, as the chaos reigns, an unexpected calamity strikes. A runaway pig, possibly confused by the abundance of food or merely plotting its escape from dinner, charges into the fray, creating a riotous spectacle. Roman soldiers, tasked with maintaining order, now find themselves chasing piglets instead of criminals. Ironically, they quickly became the newest entertainment act. Thus, the festival transforms from a test of culinary skill to a chaotic three-ring circus of mayhem, served with a heaping side of farce. As laughter, food, and the occasional pig dart through the air, even Emperor Nero himself can't help but chuckle from his imperial box seat. After all, when in Rome, one must appreciate the absurdity of it all. The festival ends not in the awarding of a golden spoon, but in a collective agreement to cancel all future festivals involving food, which is exactly the content that would keep Gaius, Marcus, and Livia well fed until next year, both literally and metaphorically. So, what's the takeaway from this comedic food affair? Surround yourself with loyal friends and questionable pastries, because when culinary bravery is on the line, Rome will always have the most delightful chaos. In the heart of Rome, circa 60 BCE, we find ourselves in a raucous tavern where the air is thick. No, not with anticipation of gladiatorial combat, but with the distinctive bouquet of low-grade wine, sweat, and a hint of something that maybe used to be goat cheese. Here, amidst the flickering torchlight, the laughter of drunken patrons mingles with the nearly unbearable sound of one too many enthusiastic melodies being belted out poorly by a bard clearly past his prime. At a nearby table sits Gaius Decimus, your everyman Roman citizen, sporting a toga that, after a few too many cups of that notably subpar wine known as musty Margot, has seen better days. He watches intently as the barkeep, a nervous-looking fellow with sweat trickling down his brow, prepares a large jug of the finest vintage, which is still decidedly worse than grape juice left out in the sun. The tension in the tavern isn't about whether Decimus can finish his third cup without taking a nap on the table. No, it's the looming presence of the Roman Senate's newest mandate: strict regulations on wine production. That's right, loyal viewers. The Senate has decided that rather than consuming a light beverage with their meals, everyone must now drink only the establishment-approved vintages, forcing parents to explain to curious children why their sparkling grape juice isn't part of the emperor's inner circle. Bardic music crescendos as an illustrious wine merchant strides in, decked out in the finest robes that were probably brighter before he found the wine. He's peddling not just any wine, but a rumor. There's a hidden barrel of the good stuff stashed away, and those who find it shall not only gain wealth, but prestige, perhaps even a drape of toga befitting a senator. Decimus perches forward in his seat, curiosity and liquid courage mixed in equal measure, as fellow barflies nod sagely, readying their ill-conceived adventure plans, which surely involve far too much wine and no coherent map. Soon, an exponential rise in absurdity commences. A group of locals engages in heated debate over the proper techniques of sneaking into a senator's vineyard. One proposes they dress as tourists, carrying stylish Roman sandals and oversized hats, while another insists on disguises based on a rather blurry interpretation of stealth. Stealth in Rome, as you might have guessed, resembles a group of overeager toga-clad men looking suspiciously shifty while engaged in an entirely unnatural amount of crouching. With a plan weighing heavily, or perhaps lightly, Depending on the amount of wine consumed in their minds, the group preps for the heist. You would think planning the theft of the finest wine in Rome would involve maps and strategies, but these guys are armed with nothing but a large amphora, an old goat playing a reluctant accomplice, and an undeniable thirst for bad decisions. As they approach the vineyard, tacky disguises and all, they stumble upon an unexpected twist. The vineyard's owner, a disgruntled ex-senator, is holding a grand soiree right in the middle of them, trying to act coolly inconspicuous. The delightful irony? Everyone was so focused on not being noticed, dressed and acting like complete buffoons, that they completely missed the sign hung by the entrance which read, "Wine served free, all welcome." The evening ends not with a daring escape through the vineyards, nor with stolen riches, but among sober regrets and historians nodding their heads in approval of the lack of ambition demonstrated by man. As the group garners a hefty hangover, they toast with the value of understanding regulations. Clearly, they'd have survived with less drama had they only read a sign before plotting their escapades. And thus, we learn, the only true heist in the Roman Empire was against one's own common sense. For wine always tastes better when acquired through sheer stupidity, and who needs barrels when an invitation works just as well? So remember, dear viewers, sometimes the only thing standing between you and a good time is an ill-fated plan to steal a barrel from a vineyard that might just hold a sippy cup of history. Picture this. The year is 100 AD. The glorious Roman Empire is at its zenith, and the setting is a lavish villa in the heart of Pompeii, where the air is thick with the smell of roasted dormice and perfume so strong it could blind you. The sun blazes outside, but inside, it's dimly lit by flickering oil lamps, casting shadows that could very well be the spirits of the unfortunate souls who dared to dine here before you. The host, a rather enthusiastic patrician named Gaius, stands proudly at the head of a long marble table so ornate it looks like it's been borrowed from the gods themselves. Seated around him are an assortment of the elite, sycophants who would cheer for Gaius even if he served them straight-up poison, which, given the rumors of culinary mishaps, might not be entirely off the table. Tonight's menu promises to be a feast fit for Jupiter. A starter of lavishly stuffed frogs, a main of roast peacock, complete with feathers for dramatic flair, and the piece de resistance, a luxurious dessert of honeyed wine-soaked honeycomb served alongside a side of rancid mushroom paste that the cook swears is part of an ancient aphrodisiac recipe, but is commonly understood as, well, a death sentence. As the food is brought to the table, tension mounts. Why? Because this isn't just dinner. It resembles a bizarre episode of Survivor Roman Edition. Plots of vengeance and greed simmer just below the surface like the bubbling cauldron of a soothsayer, with suspicious glances exchanged among the guests as they try to determine who had the most motive to slip something unwanted into the delicious-looking dishes. It's like a high-fashion, bloodthirsty version of a cooking show, where contestants do permanent damage to one another instead of just their dignity. The first course arrives. Gaius boasts that each frog has been specially prepared with a secret blend of herbs, which is Roman code for, "I didn't poison the frogs, I promise." The first guest, a slimy politician, takes a bite and pauses. Everyone holds their breath, as if he's diffusing an emotional bomb. "Delicious!" he exclaims, as the relief washes over the surrounding diners. Too early, it turns out, as the cook, previously unshackled from sanity, caters to the whims of the hyper-elated Gaius and serves a second round. "But wait!" someone in the back shouts. "Are those dormice hanging off the chandelier?" "Yes," Gaius affirms, as the cook rushes to explain that they were just hanging out while waiting for their big moment. The very sight sends guests into a flashback of that one ill-fated banquet when the dormice fought back, biting the poor servant and setting off a chain reaction of dramatic squabbling that lasted weeks. Tension breaks when the main course arrives, the roasted peacock glistening menacingly. Gaius, in all his bravado, uncovers the dish, revealing a beak-whistling confrontation with the concerns of animal rights that would make the philosopher Seneca roll over in his grave. Is there a hidden motive behind this elaborate spectacle? Or just a desire to show off wealth, like one brandishing a trophy of questionable taste? Yet, as guests pile their plates with bubbling sides of questionable cheese, it's the dessert that sends them over the edge. The honeycomb mash is served with a flourish and a warning. "Only the brave shall indulge," says Gaius with manic enthusiasm as he watches the diners grapple between pleasure and the very real likelihood of gastrointestinal destruction. Yet, they dive in, fingers sticky, allergies unspoken. Suddenly, the lights dim further, and a frantic commotion ensues as everyone jumps at the real possibility of sulfurous fumes rising from the gelatinous masses of mushroom paste. It's the tipping point. One guest dramatically falls off his chair, shrieking that Gaius has secretly cast a demonic spell on the feast. Within moments, the villa erupts into chaos. Guests are scrambling to flee, trampling over one another, with visions of a post-diarrhea lifetime flashing in their minds. In the end, as the dust settles and the screams fade into the distance, Gaius sits amid the remains of still sticky honeycomb and a peacock carcass, glancing at the remnants of his once grand banquet. The real winner? The cook, who somehow managed to turn dinner into an enigmatic art exhibit on mortality and the fate of the human soul. Lesson learned? When dining in Rome, remember that sharing a meal can be a team-building exercise in survival, especially when the main course might just outlive you. The year is 54 AD, and we're not talking about your friendly neighborhood cooking show. Instead, it's an extravagant Roman feast fit for an emperor, or at least a guy who believes he might qualify for elevation as one. Picture this: a sun-soaked banquet hall swirling with the aromas of garlic, fresh fish, and just a hint of panic, because someone's about to serve the emperor a dish renowned for its unpredictability. In the center of the chaos, we have Emperor Nero, decked out in his finest purple toga, swirling the wine like it holds the secrets of the universe. The air is thick with the smell of roasted peacocks and unspoken rivalry, punctured by the shouts of chefs competing for the emperor's attention like overzealous reality TV contestants. If that's not enough, you've got a mad chorus of servants flitting about, tripping over their own sandals as they struggle not to drop the latest culinary experiments made from questionable ingredients. Hold tonight's glorious centerpiece, a dish that has become the toast of the Roman kitchens: flamingo tongue salad. Yes, you heard that correctly, because in Rome, if it's exotic, it's probably on the menu, and if it's potentially toxic, even better. Adorned with saffron and served on a golden platter, this unholy concoction has everyone both hungry and slightly nauseous at the same time. But wait, before anyone gets too excited, let's remember the quirky Roman superstitions surrounding food. If it's too hot, that means the gods are angry. Too few herbs, that's an invitation for ill omens, or worse, blandness. The chefs, caught in a trolley dash through food folklore, sprinkle the salad with enough herbs to satisfy a Roman grocery's entire stock. Just one herb too few, and someone might find themselves swimming with the fishes, probably with the flamingos too, if they dare challenge the emperor's gastronomic bravado. As the dish approaches Nero, the tension spikes. A looming thought clouds the air greater than the smog from the last gladiatorial event. Are those flamingo tongues even supposed to be safe? Did anybody check with the soothsayer or just the local food blogger? Suddenly, there's an audible gasp from the crowd as a demigod disguised as a chef takes fate into their own hands, chanting incantations more suited for a magic show than a meal. Finally, a mouthful of intrigue as Nero raises the tongue salad to his lips, pausing to quirk an eyebrow. Is that a tingling sensation on his tongue, or just the sensation of all Rome holding its breath? The court goes so silent that you could hear Murmillo warriors regretting the last of their bread rolls. In a strange twist of fate, he smacks his lips and declares, "Delectable!" immediately alleviating fears and increasing the feather furor among onlookers, wondering if this feast will result in glory or disaster. Just then, he reaches for the wine, only to discover that someone, presumably an intern, added way too much honey and not nearly enough vinegar. Cue chaos. Nero, convinced he just ingested something foul in both flavor and symbol, stands up, points dramatically, and declares that the honey is treasonous. Servants scramble as they try to ensure the honey never touches his lips again, which is ironic given that honey was supposed to represent prosperity. In the madness, one brave chef, clearly operating on his third too many cups of wine, leaps onto the table, shouting something about having a great idea for a backup dish of roast beets, only to be swiftly subdued by the guards. Meanwhile, the flamingo tongues, safe for the moment, are declared the dish of the evening, as traditional Roman humor dictates. Never let a culinary error ruin a perfectly good dinner. So what do we take away from this delicious calamity in history? In Rome, the kitchen was simply another arena, and culinary bravado was often the best recipe for survival. Remember, if you can't handle the heat, stay far, far away from flamingo tongues and never appear in the kitchen during an emperor's food fight. Picture this. The year is 9 BC. We land in Rome, just outside a bustling forum. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow over the grand white marble buildings, giving the whole place a picturesque feel. But wait, does that smell wafting through the air signify a fragrant feast or a festival for the olfactory challenged? Inside a lavish banquet hall, wax tablets and fancy goblets abound. We find our key players. Lucius, the overly ambitious senator, who somehow believes that serving the finest food can buy him a few friends, and Petronius, the food critic so pretentious he wouldn't review a tomato unless it was organically grown under an olive dome tree in the Tuscan hills. And the centerpiece of this feast? A large vat of garum, a Roman fermented fish sauce that smells like a high tide gone wrong. As the lights flicker and the waitstaff scurry like ants on amphetamines, the atmosphere crackles with a mix of excitement and horror. The various scents of grilled meat, baked bread, and, oh yes, garum, coalesce into an aromatic epic that's borderline nauseating yet intriguing. Each guest tries to smile while fighting off the urge to gag at the sheer potency of the fish sauce. Now, typically, one doesn't consume garum like it's ketchup at a barbecue. It's a condiment, you see. But, for some reason, this particular vintage of garum, labeled extra old, is put on the table with what one can only assume is the hope of elevating the ambiance. In Rome, garum had achieved cult status, revered as a symbol of luxury and sophistication. Never mind the fact that it was basically fermented fish guts. Nothing screams classy like a pungent bottle of liquefied seafloor. But one wrong flip of the wrist, and a senator could find himself swimming with the fishes, socially speaking. As dinner commences, our ambitious Lucius dips his bread into the garum, the legendary sauce cascading like a treacherous waterfall. The lights dim now, and it's as if every eye in the room narrows, hyper-focused on his next move. Would this be a grand culinary triumph or utter social suicide? He thinks, what's the worst that could happen? Unbeknownst to him, the Roman elite have a long-standing beef, quite literally and figuratively, with any dishonorable behavior during a meal. Dish on the garum, and the fallout could be catastrophic. Opinions would fly, as he would turn from a dashing senator to that poor fellow who couldn't handle the most exquisite of flavors. As the garum oozes off the bread and into his mouth, time slows. The banquet hall seems to hold its collective breath. His face contorts into a confused rapture. Has he found ecstasy or just a new way to embrace regret? All eyes are on him. And then, silence. For a heart-stopping moment, someone drops a grape, and the sound ricochets like gunfire in the room. A maid nearly faints. Petronius has his pen poised to write something devastating. Suddenly, with the audacity that only a senator could muster, Lucius raises his goblet in a toast, his garum-laden breath filling the air. To friendship, may we all embrace the stench of honesty. To his utter astonishment, laughter erupts, filling the hall with life. The absurdity of the moment overshadowing the revolting reality of their garum. In that exact moment, Lucius went from potential social pariah to the most beloved guest of the evening. End of the day, garum wasn't just a sauce. It was a gamble that turned a toast to disaster into a culinary comedy. And here's the punchline. When in Rome, it's clear that the only thing you need to worry about is your sauce choices. It might just make or break your social standing or save you from the loneliness of a fish guts lover. Cue the dramatic music. The year, 42 A.D. The setting, a gloriously chaotic Roman banquet hall, the kind where the floors are so slippery from spilled wine that you might as well be ice skating. The air is thick with the scent of roasted partridge, the refreshing odor of fresh figs, and, if you listen closely, the faint echoes of desperate whispers warning against the perils of eating fish on a Tuesday. Enter Gaius Flavius, a senator with more ambition than sense. He strides in with a toga so pristine that you could practically eat off of it. And many have, considering the history of food at these gatherings. Tonight's special? A majestic dish of garum, that fragrant fish sauce so beloved by the Romans that some might have mistaken it for liquid gold. Except, of course, it doesn't quite sparkle or smell like it. Things are almost jovial in the hall until the realization strikes that Gaius has chosen fish. Why fish? because nothing says I'm taking serious risks in my political career like a plate of fermented ocean mozzarella. The diners are not overly keen, their eyebrows twitching with the instinct of an ancient Italian mom who's sensed an impending disaster. What you see next could be mistaken for a theatrical preview. The food taster, a poor fellow in a colorfully embroidered toga, resembling a disco ball in a paint factory, prepares to sample the garum. But there's a catch. Fish wasn't just fish. It was a potential 2-for-1 deal on political assassination. You see, suspicions abound. In the intricately woven tapestry of Roman life, the fish was both a delicacy and a metaphorical ticking time bomb. Was it poisoned? Did it come from the same merchant who had the audacity to sell rotten cabbage last winter? Had someone slipped a personal vendetta into the marinade? Gaius, scanning the room, prepares for the inevitable chaos. Flavius shakes, his eyes darting as whispers of an alleged curse linger in the air. Something about Neptune himself getting testy over dinner choices. The taster, unbeknownst to him, has become a pivotal player in this culinary circus. He bravely lifts a spoonful, only to be met with a cacophony of heightened chirps from an ecstatic parrot perched mischievously above him, as if demanding a front-row seat. As the garum touches the taster's tongue, time seems to crawl. His eyes bulge. He appears to hover in mid-air for a brief second as he absorbs what he's just tasted. Gaius sweats bullets. The witnesses hold their breath. A clownish servant stumbles forward, nearly tipping a bowl of olives, a mix of horror and anticipation covering every face in the audience. And just like that, the taster bursts into a raucous laugh, and then another. The guests blink with surprise, some genuinely appalled at what they believe might be an imminent end. Was this laughter a good or bad sign? Silence fills the air as he thumps his chest, declaring loudly, "By Jupiter, this is the finest garum I've ever tasted." What follows is a symphony of applause, combined with the underlying tension of a group of very confused, sweaty men worrying about future fish dinners should they survive another banquet. Turns out, the garum wasn't poisoned. It was merely overly fermented, leading the taster to hallucinate the flavor of the divine while enticing many guests to take cautious spoon-sized sips, thereby dodging a culinary catastrophe. The moral of the story: in the Roman Empire, avoiding fish depended on your political savvy, or just at least knowing when to order the lamb. Truly, a banquet could very well turn into a banquet of politicians or a malignant mackerel. Just remember, nothing adds zest to dinner like the threat of assassination, or a parrot judging you from above. Cue the dramatic music. The year, 69 AD. The place, a lavishly adorned Roman villa reeking of wealth, ambition, and aging fish. Welcome to a dinner party hosted by a senator so influential he could convince the gods to order takeout. And what's for dinner? A seemingly innocent dish of boiled vegetables, dripping with a savory sauce. Garum. Garum, the culinary darling of the Roman Empire, a fermented fish sauce that made even the Varro's scrolls feel like fast food. Bright enough to blind with its pungent glory, garum was more than just a condiment. It was a cultural phenomenon, a gastronomic rite of passage, and quite possibly a weapon of scandal. Picture it. golden candelabras flickering, shadows dancing against marble walls, and the air thick with the intoxicating smell of fish decay. Guests, you know, the usual suspects of backroom dealings and debauched laughter, are seated, ready to indulge in this liquid umami that could both elevate a dish and destroy reputations. But trouble brews beneath the lavishness of the setting. Enter Lucius, a food taster with a more dangerous job than a Roman general on the battlefield. His task tonight? Savor every fishy drop of garum before the emperor touches it. The stakes couldn't be higher. One bite too many, and he'd end up making a one-way trip to the afterlife, served with a side of suspicious mustard. During dinner, an unsuspecting guest, Marcus, the senator's jealous rival, decides to take a hearty dip of the garum, clearly underestimating the raging potential for scandal cradled within that bottle. As the guests swoon over the elegant presentation, Lucius's heart races, for he knows what no one else does. The garum has been cursed. By whom, you ask? Why? By a scorned fishmonger whose prized catch was rejected for being too fishy. Legend claimed that this particular batch had been infused with the wrath of Neptune himself, or at least a very angry seagull. As Marcus enthusiastically gulps down the garum-laden vegetables, a hush falls upon the banquet. Whispers of a poison plot swirl through the air, thick enough to cut with a fish-shaped knife. Lucius's mind spins. What if this was it? What if the enemy was within the bowl? The tension rises like a Roman tower, ready to topple. In a twist of irony and absurdity worthy of a dramatic stage, Marcus falls silent, eyes widening as if caught in a divine comedian's routine. And just then, erupting from his mouth like Vulcan's fury, comes a forceful retch, followed by an unexpectedly poetic soliloquy about the temperamental nature of fish. The garum had struck back. The table gasps. How glamorous it must be to choke on your rival's ambitions. Coughing and spluttering, Marcus transforms the exquisite affair into a scene so chaotic that even the orators would struggle to make sense of it. The guests, half laughing, half wincing, try to process this new layer of gastronomical performance art. Meanwhile, Lucius, somewhat relieved but utterly baffled, recoils at the irony of it all. He quickly labels the event as a public display rather than a murder attempt, knowing that his ornery existence as a food taster might survive another day. As Marcus is led away, declaring the garum was an affront to Roman dignity, the dinner resumes, albeit with a slight fishy taste of skepticism still lingering in the air. So what did we learn, dear audience? Always verify the integrity of your fish sauce, because when it comes to Roman dinners, even the condiments can lead to fishy business. Picture this: Rome, AD 30. The sun hangs high in the sky, casting its warm, glamorous glow over the bustling forum. In the distance, the delicious aroma of roasted hare mingles with something perhaps a bit less savory, like an ancient fragrance of regret, also known as charred testicles, in a culinary scandal of epic proportions. Welcome to the opulent home of Gaius Maximus Glutton. Gaius is a man whose belly is as grand as his aspirations. His dining room, lavishly decorated with frescoes depicting former feasts, is filled with excited chatter, clinking goblets, and the occasional veil of flying grape skins as servants run about frantically. tonight's culinary centerpiece, far too much food, and a live lion. Because nothing screams luxurious dining experience quite like a wild animal on the floor, probably contemplating its life choices as it stares at its dinner for the evening. Just wait until it starts eyeing the guests, particularly that one overly confident philosopher who had way too much wine and seems to believe he can engage it in soliloquy. At the height of Roman decadence, dining was an affair resembling less of a meal and more of a chaotic performance art installation. The rich dined reclining on couches, their faces smeared with sauces as they indulged in delicacies like peacock tongues and roasted dormice. The atmosphere crackles with a tension built on gluttony, the fear of indigestion, and the creeping realization that anyone could end up as someone else's soup. As Gaius raises his goblet filled with a questionable mix of wine and something suspiciously resembling vinegar, he prepares to unveil the pièce de résistance. His guests clamor with anticipation, dabbling their embraced not-great philosophies about the morality of consuming testicles, leeks, and the occasional gladiator's ghost. However, this particular evening, proceedings are a tad unusual. In an effort to impress his guests with his bona fide opulence, Gaius has decided to serve the feast in a traditional way, with flair. This means, of course, that the lion must first be adorned in a crown of laurel leaves before it is finally released into the dining arena, but not before a lavish blessing to abandon their mortality for the evening supper. What Gaius fails to calculate, of course, is that this is a terrible idea. The lion, having been fed a rather questionable diet of fragrant herbs, unfortunately not the serenity-inducing sort, gets a little too excited and leaps onto one of the couches, scattering not just the food, but the dignity of everyone present, including Gaius' high-ranking mother-in-law, who ironically was contemplating her own dinner with the gods. Now, one might say this is a most unfortunate series of events, but be assured, it's merely an everyday occurrence in the illustrious life of late Roman dining. The guests panic in choreographed disgrace, fleeing the scene with reckless abandon while one optimistic philosopher sidesteps the melee to engage with the lion, all the while shouting, "The real question here is not whether we will survive, but what does existence mean in a world where lions roam freely among us?" Oh, the Persephone has officially left the building. Meanwhile, Gaius finds himself stained with grape juice, torn between sinking, bellowing bickering and the taste of irony seasoning every remaining dish. The lion, oddly enough, doesn't pursue Gaius, but settles on stealing a platter of honey-roasted figs. Evidently, not all beasts share the same Epicurean aspirations. As the remnants of dinner collapse into a scene resembling a gladiatorial match of intellect and brawn, laughter and panic weave together. One brave soul even yells out, "Brilliant! Now, mind the sauce." In true Roman fashion, the day is salvaged as the wine flows more freely than the concerns about dinner etiquette, setting the stage for disheveled conversations sprinkled with self-deprecating humor about how one did not quite last the day in Gaius Maximus' lion-infested lair. And what's the moral of this grotesque charade? There's no recipe for a banquet so absurd that it can't end with both a lion and a laugh on the side. Remember, just because dinner has teeth doesn't mean it can't serve a punchline. Cue the dramatic music. The year, 50 AD. The setting, a sprawling Roman villa, where golden mosaics gleam far too brightly under the flickering torchlight. The air, a delightful melange of roasting meats, spiced wines, and the ever-pleasant odors of a few too many unwashed toga wearers. As we pan across the lavishly set dining hall, a peculiar sound punctuates the evening, the low, dangerous growl of a hungry guest. Enter Gaius, a well-fed senator whose wealth is only rivaled by his insatiable appetite. The meal of the evening? A grand feast of cooked peacock surrounded by bowls of olives and bread infused with herbs, or, as Gaius calls it, the bland dish of doom. Yet this is not an ordinary meal. This is a political statement wrapped in a toga. In theory, feeding politicians should be easy enough. Show them food, and they'll devour it like they would their constituents' hopes. But in the Roman Empire, food was saved for the cunning and the cautious. Poisoning one's dinner guest was basically a team sport. The stakes? Your life, and possibly a seat on the Senate. On this particular evening, Gaius was not merely entertaining guests, he was managing a culinary conspiracy. The whispers around the table spoke of a rival senator, one who might just be looking to potato sack him to the underworld with a side of nightshade. Here's how dinner unfolded. Step 1. The trusted food taster arrived, a wide-eyed young man named Publius, whose job was to ensure Gaius didn't end up as a headline in the next edition of the Daily Scroll. As Publius took delicate spoonfuls of each dish with the fear of a gladiator before battle, the senators watched on with bated breath. It was a spectacle akin to watching a soap opera unfold. Except if the hero stumbled, he would definitely be dead. The preparations included a ritual to appease the gods of gastronomy. Weren't sure if the roasted peacock was fresh? No problem. Just sacrifice a goat and consult the omens. Because who doesn't love a side of religious paranoia with the dinner? As the evening progressed, tension brewed amidst culinary adventures. Spoons clanked against plates like catapults loading at dawn, and Gaius couldn't shake off the feeling that his vegetable dish was plotting against him. Then, the moment of truth arrived. Gaius took a daring bite of the notorious peacock, which, mind you, was still dressed in its tail feathers. The court watched him closely. Heartbeats synchronized to the thumb-twiddling of fear. Just as he swallowed, Gaius paused, his face shifting through a kaleidoscope of confusion, where sheer delight met absolute horror. A color-coded expression, part disgusted, part enlightened, painted his features. Had that been actual meat, or merely the ghosts of poisoned senators past? But rather than collapsing into a fit of betrayal, Gaius suddenly erupted in laughter. Turns out, the alleged poison was nothing more than an unsuspecting hot chili pepper conspiring against his taste buds. A culinary plot twist courtesy of the chef, who just got tired of bland dinners. While laughter erupted through the hall like a victorious battle cry, Publius breathed a sigh of relief, having narrowly avoided a dinner of literal and political death. And as for the rival senator lurking in the shadows, he left empty-handed, perhaps with a slight spice burn on his pride. So, what did we learn? When dining in the Roman Empire, always choose the dish of the day wisely. You never know. It might just be the Last Supper or a successful chili experiment. Picture this. Rome, 60 AD. The sun is setting, casting an orange glow over the bustling forum where gladiators swagger, and philosophers loudly pontificate about the imminent collapse of civilization over a glass of cheap wine. The air is crisp, filled with the smell of grilled dormice and a hint of vague apprehension that someone might actually try to hand out pamphlets about the impending doom from the Visigoths. But inside a lavish villa adorned with mosaics that could only be described as extreme interior design goals, the scene is no less absurd. Here, the famed Roman elite prepare for what is not just any banquet. It's an all-you-can-absorb toga party. But tonight's main event? A truly alarming dish, stuffed sow's womb. Yes, you heard that right. The pig's stomach, adorned with all manner of herbs, fruits, and possibly the last beneficiary of our shared culinary sanity, is the headliner. As the camera pans across the villa, we catch glimpses of the glittering silverware, a waste of resources that could have fed an entire legion, and the sounds of raucous laughter as patrons actively pretend that they are not keeping a wary eye on their neighbor, who is suspiciously eyeing the large bowl resembling a health hazard just waiting to happen. The aromas wafting from the kitchen are enough to make the strong-hearted swoon and the weak stomachs faint. A garlicky incense that turns your gut and a scent of something akin to spoiled ambition. Ritual after ritual unfolds, each weirder than the last. Guests are required to exchange chicken jokes while holding a plate of questionable seafoods, because why not add seafood to the mix? Then there's the alarming superstition surrounding the sow's womb itself. You must eat with your right hand only while simultaneously reciting a series of incantations to the gods. Because why wouldn't divine intervention be necessary to help you survive dinner? The tension rises palpably as guests parse their relationships with their intestines versus their aspirations for societal status. Suddenly, boom! A crash echoes through the hall as a toga-clad philosopher drops his plate. Shouts erupt. Fear spreads like wildfire. You'd think Caesar just walked in with a bucket of ice water. Panic ensues as whispers of bad omens fly about the room. Poisoned wombs, vengeful spirits, cats that never get enough attention. No one wants to risk the wrath of a dead pig's potential plundering of their dignity. Just when it seems the evening might descend into bedlam, the master of the house, a portly, overzealous patrician, stands, still grasping a fig for good measure. With a flourish, he points to the bowl. Fear not. This is simply an extravagance. A statement, he bellows, though whether this statement is for the good of his bowels or the betterment of Roman cuisine remains a mystery. In a calculated act of bravery, or madness, it's hard to tell, he takes a Herculean bite of the sow's womb. Tension builds. Every eye in the room is affixed to his twitching facial expressions. As other guests hold their breath, he chews, gulps, and with unexpected charisma proclaims, "Delicious." The moment bursts with a comedy of relief, only for the timing to be worse than a bad comedic act. It turns out he has swallowed too fast and is now choking, desperately clawing for air as chaos reigns once more. As attendants rush to his side, one wise old woman leans back, flicking a grape from her hand, and exclaims deadpan, "You see, it's not the womb you need to fear. It's the company at a Roman dinner party." Ultimately, the whole soiree ends with a rush to the latrine that could only be rivaled by Olympic sprinting, And what's the lesson to extract from this culinary debacle engulfed in social gamesmanship? In Rome, remember, the only thing more dangerous than dining on exotic delicacies is dining with friends who have shown no mercy in the art of making you laugh until it hurts. Cue the dramatic music. The year, 52 BCE. The setting, a lavish Roman banquet hall, opulently decorated with flowing silks, marble statues of suspiciously well-sculpted gladiators, and enough decorative garlands to ward off bad taste, both in food and company. The air, thick with the aromas of roasted peacock, spoiled oysters, and an asbestos-like cloud of incense designed specifically for the sole purpose of masking the scent of food that had definitely passed its prime. Enter Lucius, a senator of moderate repute and questionable hygiene, preparing to host the grand feast of the year, an event that would go down in history, but for all the wrong reasons. He prided himself on providing his guests with extravagant culinary delights, a real taste of Rome, if you will. Unfortunately, tonight's feature was a new type of fish, affectionately known as scomber. Little did he know, this fish essentially translated to smelly and on the verge of decomposition. Picture this. The guests arrive, bedecked in togas adorned with a suspicious amount of gold embroidery. The lights flicker from hundreds of candles shaped like the heads of defeated enemies, and laughter bubbles only slightly above the serious undertones of anxiety about who might be next to be clawed at by the fierce nature of gossip. Little did they know, the foul fish swimming on their plates was the least of their troubles. As the appetizers are served, chickpea pudding, stuffed dormice, and a sprightly drizzle of nutmeg. Tension rises as conversation starts morphing into whispers, as each colorful dish is inspected with narrowed eyes. The moment of truth approaches. The fish course arrives, elegantly plated, if you can overlook the unmistakable green hue. The senators employ all sorts of quirky rituals to ensure they don't die of food poisoning at this lavish affair. One man recalibrates his luck by performing an excessively exaggerated handshake with a servant, the ancient equivalent of a personal chef. Another waves around an ancient amulet supposedly blessed by Neptune himself, imploring its divine protection against, well, fish. Yet another checks the alignment of the stars, convinced that if Jupiter is not in the house of the fish, their fate is sealed. But alas, Lucius prepares to serve the fish, only to hear a collective gasp as multiple guests take one sniff and recoil as if a cauldron of boiling debt had been dropped in front of them. Just then, the esteemed food taster, a glorified job title for someone who's definitely on their last meal, steps forward, wincing, and takes a risk. He raises his fork dramatically before promptly collapsing mid-bite, breathing one last prayer to the gods of culinary failure. Chaos ensues. Senators begin pointing fingers with such ferocity, one gentleman nearly skewers himself attempting to blame his neighbor for being less than delightful company. Meanwhile, the walls of the hall are suddenly echoing with the sound of hasty footfalls as the kitchen brigade faces an audience more ferocious than a pack of starving lions. Heads roll in both a literal and metaphorical sense as Lucius tries to somehow salvage his reputation. And then, as if summoned by the gods of irony themselves, a hapless henchman stumbles in with an ancient scroll, declaring that the fish, scomber or otherwise, had in fact been a gift from the neighboring tribe, now facing a brutal conflict over their own feuds and foul-tasting offerings. The fish was symbolic, a sign of war. The room erupts into uncontrollable laughter that echoes through the once stifled air, transforming panic into a feast of merriment infused with rebirth and rejuvenation. Because nothing says celebration quite like a solid piece of rotten fish accompanied by a side of international conflict. And what's the takeaway from this banquet-turned-battlefield? Perhaps, even in the Roman Empire, diplomacy can sometimes be served on a platter of absolute insanity. So always remember, never trust a fish that comes bearing stories of territorial disputes. Truly, a feast to be remembered for centuries, but perhaps not in a way that Lucius would want. The year 44 BCE. The city, Rome, the bustling heart of decadence, where ambition runs thicker than olive oil, and the stench of raw ambition mixes with the fragrant aromas of street food. Gaius Julius Caesar is hosting a feast so extravagant it makes Versailles look like a potluck. But what's that smell wafting through the colonnades? Ah, the delightful bouquet of fear, mixed with a hint of garlic and last week's leftovers. As the sun dips below the Senate, casting an orange glow through the marble columns, we find Caesar reclining on a chaise lounge, surrounded by politicians, poets, and the odd gladiator, all engaged in the ancient Roman pastime of backstabbing, both figuratively and literally. The menu tonight includes a delightful array of seafood, roasted boar, and a rather suspicious-looking platter of mushrooms. Enter the food tasters, the unsung heroes of haute cuisine, or should we say, the last lines of defense against the culinary conspiracies that are afoot. These brave souls, clad in white tunics that likely cost more than their yearly salary, hold their breaths as they sample every dish. The aroma of sizzling meat clashes with the more rancid stench of treachery hanging in the air, dramatically highlighting the stakes involved. Who knew dinner could be this tense? Now, why are we suddenly so fixated on the culinary arts? Because at a Roman feast, food was never just food, it was political ammunition. Everyone in the room knows that the right dish could grant favor, while the wrong one could land you in the afterlife, preferably hastened by a twist of poison. The recipe for tonight's meal includes rare sea urchin and a side of paranoia just to spice things up. As Caesar raises his wine goblet, a lavish piece of golden-crusted bling that likely doubles as a signal of impending doom, the room goes silent. Is it the wine? The mushrooms? Was there a chance that Calpurnia, his devoted wife, had taken to a cooking show on the side and miscalculated the whole evening? Tension escalates to near sitcom levels. Cue the entrance of the official taster, a man whose job description could read your first-class ticket to death. Gaius, the taster, approaches the platter, quaking like a leaf in the summer wind, eyeing the mushrooms doubtfully. In a twist of fate more ironic than a history book ever captures, he decides tonight is not the night to be bold. Apparently, he has plans for the weekend and a severe aversion to historical significance. Moments before Gaius can take the plunge, a dramatic faux pas occurs. A gust of wind sends a flock of pigeons straight through the open atrium. They scatter the table settings, sending knives and forks flying, and the remaining feast-goers into a frenzy. Amid the chaos, the platter is knocked to the ground. shattered shells and smashed mushrooms. Amidst the debris, a cry of horror rises. Could someone have really been planning to send Caesar to the other side through mushroom-induced famine? The air is thick with dramatic irony. Caesar, still holding his goblet, watches the scene unfold. He can't help but lean into the hilarity of the moment. The very moment where a room full of power players becomes a slapstick farce of miscommunication and utter mayhem. Soon enough, laughter ripples through the crowd as Gaius dusts himself off, claiming divine intervention and a predilection toward truffle oil. As order is restored, the truth emerges. Not only was the mushroom simply a mushroom, but no one was truly trying to assassinate Caesar tonight. That would happen later, courtesy of an oddly friendly Brutus. The guests resumed eating what was left, minus the ill-fated fungi, now a mere footnote in the annals of Roman history. So remember, even with political intrigue bubbling like a simmering pot, culinary conspiracies involving mushrooms can backfire spectacularly when laughter joins the table. Let us transport you back to the year of our Lord like 4 AD, where the city of Rome is not just a civilization, but an epicenter of chaos, pleasure, and unspeakable odors. We open in a grand triclinium, the living room of the elite, where the floor is covered in plush cushions, the walls adorned with frescoes depicting the latest violent gladiatorial contests, and the air thick with the intoxicating odors of spiced garum, fermented fish sauce that could make even the most seasoned noses weep. Here lies our protagonist, a pompous patrician named Gaius Appius, whose ego is only matched by the vast quantities of food set in front of him. On the menu for tonight's celebration, a regal display including roasted peacock, stuffed dormice, and a side of oca, which was creatively labeled as garlic, though it could just as easily be mistaken for overcooked swamp algae. The table is set with silver platters glinting like awards for the best poised to choke on one's own bad taste. The atmosphere crackles with anticipation as the guests recline, like lions awaiting a good nap after a feast, but not before first partaking in the most absurd of Roman rituals, the omen readings. One hapless slave is parsimoniously adorned in togas, charged to scrutinize the entrails of the previous meal's sacrifice while everyone watches with bated breath, like a Roman episode of America's Got Talents. I foresee an abundance of discomfort ahead, the seer crows, while Gaius slaps his thigh in delight, oblivious to the chance that the discomfort he feels might also stem from last week's lavish feasting. But tension arises when a grid of wine-flavored paranoia begins to take root. You see, Roman aristocrats believed they couldn't be too careful in matters of food. After all, there's nothing like a conspiracy to spice up a party. Half of Gaius's guests start discreetly checking for signs of poisoning, which in all fairness is a neat party trick until someone discovers a suspicious-looking bit of tarragon sprouting on the edge of a dish. Chaos erupts. Platters and goblets go flying as accusations of treachery fly like missiles. "It's the lentils, I swear," cries one guest, lunging at his neighbor as though they were in a full-blown Colosseum showdown rather than a dinner gathering. But fear not. Just when you think Rome is about to descend into a powder keg of sour wine and twice-baked accusations, enter the hero of our tale. A rather impoverished but incredibly spry kitchen slave, who, unbeknownst to all, had just consumed the very same garum he had served. With a few deft moves, he separates himself from the madness, grabs the closest dish, and triumphantly slathers it in a fresh batch of untainted garum, declaring, "This is how we dine, gentlemen. Let us toast to food rather than feuds." A reluctant murmur of applause fills the air. The guests binge on untainted food, panic subsiding as they swipe at the glorious garum like children with candy. For what's a bit of madness over a banquet in the empire, after all? Historians later suggested this event caused Rome to start a new culinary wave dedicated to guaranteed fresh dishes, led by slave chefs who had suddenly become the trendsetters of Rome. Meanwhile, Gaius Appius's noble aspirations of solidarity among the patricians dwindled considerably after the event, primarily because he was too distracted to notice that half his guests had now blissfully departed for a different gathering, to discover which was the most cursed dish among their peers. Rome lived on in its pleasantly chaotic manner, full of what some had called absurd, and others merely appetizing. Thus we are left with a valuable lesson to uphold. Always prepare your tarragon ahead of the brawl, and never, ever confuse your fermented fish with a festival of friendship. Picture this. Rome, circa 59 BC. The sun shines down on the bustling forum, where senators plot, traders haggle, and the scent of history hangs thicker than the smoke from 100 incense burners. The atmosphere? Tension mixed with an undercurrent of fermented fish. Yes, the Romans had a culinary masterpiece so celebrated that it could likely have won reality cooking competitions and sent any unsuspecting visitor to the loo in under 5 minutes. What's on the menu, you ask? Ah, the pièce de résistance, garum. To the untrained eye, it might resemble a bottle of violent regret. But to the Romans, this liquid gold was the culinary equivalent of a modern-day truffle. It could make or break your social standing, or your stomach. The great feast is set against the backdrop of a partially collapsed aqueduct, a constant reminder of the fragility of civilization. Lively banter echoes through the air, punctuated by the occasional crash from a nearby game of dice that was probably rigged by some dodgy senator trying to recover from a bad bet in the chariot races. As noble Romans gather, one can almost hear the whispers of treachery. Who's hiding poison in the garum? Which rival is using fish sauce as a smokescreen? The tension is palpable, thick enough to drown kittens in potential drama. The host, a rather portly patrician named Gaius Flavius Gluttonus, stands proudly beside a lavish platter of roasted dormice, a delicacy that makes you reflect on how history favors the absurd. What's that in the fish sauce? A hint of fish? A dash of anxiety? Whatever it is, Gaius is prepared to dollop it on everything. As he presents the garum, a fancy vase-like contraption, Roman servants squeeze the last drops like squeezing a bad story from a reluctant friend. Gaius stands tall, ready to drown even the driest bread in the pungent liquid. But here, the farce reaches ridiculous proportions. Before Gaius can pour, the most trusted servant, who was actually rumored to be working for Gaius's rival, suddenly drops the vase. Cue the sound of fishy liquid splattering across the marble floor, and an awkward silence falls. Servants scramble like they're trying to catch a runaway chariot. Gaius's face reflects horror. It's a rare, constipated expression that screams, "This dinner party is over!" The guests gasp, and one fainting senator collapses directly into a bowl of garum-spiked lentils. The irony is as thick as the air itself. Outside, the crowd of commoners goes wild. News travels like wildfire. Soon, water wrestlers are competing to see who can drink the most garum in a competition dubbed the Saucy Games. How low can you go in the quest for glory? Honestly, it's hard to say. But it all culminates gloriously when the child of a venal innkeeper mishears the order for one garum as one gory catastrophe. And so, the garum frenzy begins. People start pouring, swimming, chanting in a mania typical of an emperor's parade gone wrong. By nightfall, the great Romans have consumed enough garum to make fish look like vegetarians. In a twist of comedic elegance, it's revealed that Gaius's garum was a free sample from a long-lost underwater amphora that had been fished up a week prior. Little did anyone know it had spent years trapped with a particularly disgruntled octopus who popped up occasionally, often haunting time travelers browsing the local fish market. The aftermath? We hear stories of how the citizens of Rome laughed and cried and danced with joy or retched in horror as they tumbled through history, spiced with Roman absurdity at its best. And the lesson learned? Always remember, some battles are fought with swords, others are won with sauce. And, when in Rome, sometimes fish sauce is the friend you never knew would ruin your reputation. But hey, at least it was deliciously disastrous. Welcome to Rome, 45 BC, where the sun beats down relentlessly, and the screams of triumph from gladiators are only slightly drowned out by the rattling of chandeliers in the emperor's banquet hall. The air is thick with the scent of roasted peacock and something else that, well, let's just say the Romans had a peculiar fondness for fish sauce, also known as garum. Imagine a blend of a fish market on a hot summer day and a toddler's tantrum. That's garum. It's what really brings the flavor of the empire to life if you can survive the olfactory assault. It's here that we meet our key character, Gaius Fupidius, the emperor's chief culinary advisor, a man whose dedication to gastronomy rivals that of an Olympic athlete. Sporting a toga that could double as a sail, he frantically scribbles in his tablets, his forehead glistening with sweat that matches the lumpy gelatinous banquet dish before him. Tonight's centerpiece is a spectacular roasted dolphin, because why not? After all, nothing screams Roman extravagance quite like serving marine mammals at a feast while your populace starves. The guests are an eager entourage of senators, their eyes wide with anticipation and their bellies ready for battle. As the musicians begin to play, the atmosphere is electric, filled with laughter, the clinking of golden goblets, and the occasional sound of someone gagging after smelling the somewhat special seafood. Ah, the dolphin, a delicacy of the highest order, Gaius exclaims, thrusting his arms out as if the fish were a gladiator entering the ring. Little does he know, the dolphin was named Flipperius and had an amusingly rebellious personality, having swum away from its destiny several times before finding its way onto the platter. Now, tragedy strikes as the first slice is made. The room goes silent. It's the type of hush that induces chills deeper than a cold winter's night. Gaius, confident in his culinary prowess, cuts into the flesh. Cue the chaos. Instead of the expected waft of savory aroma, a pungent odor escapes, causing the senators to simultaneously recoil as if they'd just seen the ghost of Caesar himself. distrust rises like an anvil, with senators pointing fingers and blaming one another for what they suspect as an act of treachery. Someone had poisoned the dolphin. After all, in Rome, treachery was just another Tuesday. As panic ensues, Gaius races to salvage the situation. Perhaps a touch more garum, he suggests hesitantly, as if suggesting one would douse a fire with gasoline. The art of Roman dining, however, required a robust blend of spices. When in doubt, throw in more fish sauce. The tensions rise further as a debate about the merits of Flipperius ensues, with one senator suggesting that if they didn't finish the dish, their loyalty to the empire was in question. Finally, Gaius resorts to desperation. He launches into a lengthy monologue about the philosophy of food. To dine is to live, and better to eat a dolphin than to be a foe of the emperor. The crowd, confused but mildly intrigued, begins to engage in the flavor debate, their pride at stake. As laughter erupts over Gaius' antics, and even a disgruntled guest manages to put aside their gag reflex, the tension dissipates like a poorly made fish broth. In a stunning twist of tasting fate, they all decide to try the dish. The first brave senator takes a bite, pauses, then dramatically pronounces, "A tad salty, yet strangely refreshing." And, just like that, dolphin steak becomes the new culinary trend, with its legacy bubbling into food history no one had predicted. So what do we take away from this Epicurean escapade? The lesson is simple. In the Roman Empire, a fishy dish could turn dinners into a dramatic spectacle. Next time you're at a banquet and the entrees start smelling questionable, remember, a little garum can go a long way, but please leave the dolphins out of it. Welcome to Rome, circa 50 BC. The city alive with so much absurd excess it makes contemporary decadence look like a church potluck. The sun blazes down, casting shadows long enough to host a symposium under, while the air is thick with the distinct aroma of roasted figs mingling with something less appetizing, the smell of ruined ambitions and questionable hygiene. Enter our hero, Marcus Vespasius, a rather unfortunate citizen who just ventured into his first Roman banquet, a buffet of culinary catastrophes that would frighten even the hardiest of stomachs. Before him stands an amphora of wine, glistening in the sun like a promise of revelry. But this is no ordinary wine. It's a potent elixir spiked with honey, elderflower, and more herbs than your grandma's garden. The ambiance of the feast is one of chaotic splendor. Laughter erupts and mingles with the wails of a distant poet lamenting about love, or perhaps his latest bout of food poisoning. The guests lounge on grand couches, half reclining with grapes in hand, embodying the phrase, "I'll nap when I'm dead." And, of course, a chorus of servants flits around, trying to keep the wine flowing while dodging the inevitable projectile vomit of their more enthusiastic patrons. Now, let's not forget the peculiar superstitions surrounding this divine fruit of Bacchus. You see, Romans were convinced that drinking wine could invoke the spirit of their ancestors. Therefore, Marcus, in a moment of misguided bravery, decides to drink the potent vintage while clutching a sprig of parsley, a known charm against badness. The tension builds. This isn't just a drink, it's a test of fate. As the festivities escalate into a boisterous carnival of laughter and slurred speeches, Marcus gulps down a cup of the herbal concoction. The tension peaks as he suddenly notices the eerie silence that has enveloped the party like a bad Netflix series. Everyone stares at him, as if he's turned into a human vessel for a Roman deity. His heart races as he wrestles with the choice. Will it be ascension to the heavens or a dramatic demise? Grapes are tossed into the air like confetti, and the anticipation fills the room. After an excruciating pause, Marcus's cheeks puff up like a chipmunk's after discovering a nut stash. Cue the chaos. Resurgence of laughter erupts as he clangs his wine cup against another reveler's, exclaiming, "This is the best wine!" And yet, the background chorus of ominous warnings from his friends echo through his mind. Don't drink too much, as from last season. But plot twist. What no one saw coming was that this wine was fermenting longer than the plight of a disgraced senator. And just when Marcus thinks he surpassed the test, disaster strikes. He sneezes. Not a gentle achoo, mind you, but a full-fledged nasal explosion equivalent to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The resulting cascade of wine crosses the banquet table like a tidal wave, drenching guests and overturned platters of olives and slightly tooled cheese, all considered gourmet here. What follows feels like a poorly scripted slapstick comedy as the guests scramble to escape both the deluge of wine and their own shame. Amid the chaos, an elderly senator can be seen making a desperate dash, slipping on a rogue grape and taking a dive directly into a platter of spiced fish. And there we have it. As Marcus Vespasius watches the scene unfold, he can't help but marvel. Not only is he the center of attention, but he's also inadvertently spurred a new version of food fight they'll talk about for centuries, aptly named the Great Grape Debacle. While the world may remember the great philosophers and conquerors of Rome, local legend will spin tales of Marcus, the man who turned a casual banquet into a scene of catastrophic hilarity. What's the moral of this grand culinary caper? In Rome, even a glass of wine can lead to a cascade of misadventures. So, always check the vintage before you raise your cup, or risk becoming a comedic tragedy in someone else's banquet tale. Picture this. Rome, 43 BCE. A city so loud with the sounds of commerce and the scent of roasted pheasant that you'd think Jupiter himself had decided to host a cook-off. The forum buzzes with arty conversations, street vendors hawking their wares, and, let's not forget, the delightful acrid smell of sewer combined with sweet honey cakes that someone thought was a good idea. As the sun sets, the most affluent citizens gather in a lavishly decorated atrium, the kind that looks like it's just been dipped in layers of gold leaf and doused with a cauldron of sunshine. Enter Gaius, a prosperous senator whose waistcoat is so padded he could host a family of squirrels in it. His upcoming banquet is the talk of the town. It promises not just food, but an experience straight out of a satirical epic. At the center of this feast, a long table laden with dishes that range from the delectably familiar, like seasoned lamb, to the outright bizarre, dormice stuffed with minced snails, and a sauce made from fermented fish that smells like a fishmonger's confession. The setting crackles with energy, laughter mingling with the clanking of goblets filled with the finest wine, and the occasional what is that? As dishes arrive. But also present is the ever-elusive specter of poisoning, a theme as common in Rome as toga fashion faux pas. With each bite, the guests' eyes scan the room as if they expect a rival senator to leap from behind a pillar, dagger drawn, ready to settle scores over side dishes. The atmosphere is thick with tension as Gaius enthusiastically presents his pièce de résistance, a giant roast boar, so ostentatiously adorned with apples in its mouth that it almost looks like it's been invited to a fancy dress competition. But behold, a specially trained food taster enters the scene, a man whose job title is literally canary in a coal mine. He takes a mere sip of wine before the boar is carved. Moments pass like hours as the room holds its collective breath. Will he slump forward? Will he foamingly collapse like last week's leftovers? Turns out, the taster simply had a small hiccup, nothing more than a dramatic sigh. The guests cheer, convinced that today's boar is indeed safe for consumption, based on a hiccup and not some dreadful fate in the vicinity of vinegar. And yet, the stress of the evening isn't over, as the server trips and sends a plate of stuffed dormice flying through the air. In a stunning twist of fate, it lands directly onto the lap of Marcus, the most uptight senator, who claims he's allergic to fun and spontaneous food assaults. The irony of the evening becomes palpable as Marcus suddenly leaps up, convinced he has been cursed. He shrieks about the committee of culinary deception. His fellow guests cheer him on in fervent disbelief. After all, how can one be allergic to such delicacies when most can barely choke down their morning gruel? The situation laughs itself into oblivion as they relate his fate to the age-old superstition that eating a dormouse brings about unfortunate luck, perfect for unfavorable tales over the Senate chambers. As the evening winds down, everyone remembers the unfortunate spill and cuddles with their stomachs still full. The roast boar? Vanished. The dormice? Given a grand send-off, those lucky enough not to land on Marcus would be living to tell the tale and get invited to better parties. So here lies the lesson. In Rome, food is more than sustenance. It's a game of survival. A banquet could make or break political alliances. And for Gaius, it taught him one indelible truth. Never serve dormice at your next soiree. You might just unleash a culinary feud of mythical proportions. Welcome to 1st century Rome, where the roads are paved with ambition and the air smells suspiciously like fish sauce. The scene? An opulent banquet hall, replete with frescoes depicting grapes, gods, and Greek philosophers having a pretty serious case of FOMO. Somewhere in the background, a toga-clad guest throws up an elaborate hand gesture, possibly signifying either ecstasy or an impending food poisoning. Who can tell? Tonight's star dish? Garum. Yes, garum. The beloved fermented fish sauce that even the most adventurous culinary nihilists would struggle to appreciate. This dish has been sprinkled, drizzled, and dumped over every possible delicacy, all while producing an olfactory experience akin to a catfish's nightmare. Picture this: dim lighting flickering off walls adorned with scantily clad slaves, as well as rich aristocrats swinging their wine goblets and debating philosophy with the fervor of caffeinated squirrels. The scent of overripe olives mingles with the potent, eye-watering aroma of garum wafting through the hall like a miasma of questionable life choices. If you were to pause for a second, your nose would almost scream, "Get out! Your senses are about to be insulted." The royal host, a man whose waistline could only be described as prosperously jiggly, stands and flourishes his arms, ready to unveil the banquet's pièce de résistance. "Behold, the fish sauce of the gods," he bellows, while his guests collectively look like they've just unearthed the contents of a week-old fishing net. In unison, they compel themselves to smile, rotating their faces into masks of polite acceptance, all the while calculating potential poisons and using hand gestures to discreetly inquire if escape routes exist. As bowls of garum-laden delicacies are served, a frenzy of historical absurdities unveils itself, involving rituals nearly as dramatic as the food. Guests peer suspiciously at the dish, their minds racing through a whirlwind of noble hosts, slave tasters, and the constant question: is it just a sauce or a secret plot by the emperor's cousin to put us out of our embarrassing misery? Every spoonful feels like a gamble, especially when one slave nervously mentions that last week's batch may have been prepared during the new moon, notorious for delivering flavors that could knock a horse unconscious. Then come the whispers. Did you hear about Marcus? The last guy who dared refuse a garum-soaked dish was found floating in the Tiber with filthy sandals, but no regrets. The crowd's expressions shift between horror and mild amusement, a delicate dance of fear and camaraderie. The emperor's cousin chimes in, reiterating the age-old superstition that a rogue crab claw could summon the spirit of vengeance from the afterlife no less, especially when served alongside a generous splash of garum. Finally, amidst all this tension, fortune takes an unexpected turn. Waving his arms in dramatic flair, the host accidentally spills an entire bowl of garum over his own outfit, eliciting gasps. The sheer absurdity of the situation restores the crowd's sanity as laughter erupts. The tension dissolves like poorly cooked pasta, and instead of panic, they unite in their shared, newfound disdain for garum. Seconds later, the host slips and falls, landing smack dab into the very dish that threatened to ruin him. At this moment, he becomes an unintentional performance artist. His slippery descent into saucy oblivion turns into an unchoreographed spectacle as guests erupt into raucous laughter. The garum is no longer feared. It's now the villain-turned comedic relief of the evening. And there you have it. A lesson in excess and unintended entertainment from a time when the stakes were high and the fish even higher. So, what's the takeaway? Never be afraid to dive headfirst into the absurd, especially when your culinary experiences may guarantee you an unforgettable night, even if that night ends with you submerged in one of history's great saltwater scandals. Imagine, if you will, the bustling heart of Rome, circa 50 BC. The year when everything was ideal, except, of course, for the smell. Just as you feel your stomach rumble, you catch a different rumble, the discontented growl of a starving populace. The forum is alive with the sounds of merchants hawking wares, and the occasional gladiator practicing his brand of acrobatics, punctuated by the faint whiff of the latest culinary blunders. The scene is utterly cinematic. The golden rays of the sun spill through the towering columns of marble. The air thick with the scents of rotting fish, burnt bread, and the occasional waft of something sulphurous. The streets are alive with chatter and bickering as patricians argue over the latest political scandal, and plebeians contend with the horrors of whatever mystery meat is being served for dinner. Enter our hero, Marcus Libra, a jovial baker with a penchant for experimental bread making. Armed with a rolling pin like a noble's sword, he dons a flour-dusted toga that would give him a solid chance in any fashion competition. If only he weren't also known as the King of Crust. His specialty? An avant-garde bread made from fermented goat cheese, crushed nuts, and decidedly questionable herbs that he insists are sacred, so much so that they probably should come with a health warning. Day in and day out, Marcus toils in his makeshift bakery, a cramped grotto barely big enough for him, a dozen kids, and the existential dread that accompanies a 3-day-old loaf. Everything runs smoothly until he receives a fateful visit from the city's health inspectors. The dreaded Censoribus Pulpi, whose favorite pastime seems to be inspecting food with the same enthusiasm others save for amateur gladiatorial matches. Amid a flurry of parchment scrolls and platitudes about food quality, the censors dig their noses into Marcus's aromatic interior. What's this? They recoil, spotting a loaf that suspiciously resembles a weapon of mass strangulation. This bread could be a smuggled lethal pastry. We might have a baker's rebellion on our hands. Tension escalates. Rumors swirl throughout the forum that their beloved baker is peddling poison, and soon gladiators are summoned to protect the censor from this culinary catastrophe. Meanwhile, Marcus, rather than panic, turns the potential disaster into a free public tasting. Because when life gives you rotten cheese, why not turn it into a community event? The day arrives. The forum is packed as brave souls gather, driven by equal parts curiosity and the desire to not starve. The grand reveal is met with a suspenseful silence, only to be punctured by a loud squelch as Marcus slices through the loaf, revealing a vibrant green interior that looks like something a cat might regurgitate. The brave spectators tentatively taste a small piece, expecting tragedy, but finding it oddly delightful. A thunderous applause breaks out as they realize this isn't poison, it's an antiquated culinary masterpiece. The censors stand flabbergasted as the loyal Romans proclaim Marcus their hero, while the entire city seems ready to adopt a new slogan. You might not last a day without Marcus's bread. But just as everyone begins to embrace this gastronomic adventure, the censors demand a follow-up, a mandatory food fair with all of Rome's finest as participants. The twist? It becomes an unintended gladiatorial contest to see who can create the most horrendous dish, with the winner decided by a vote from the immensely confused audience. Ultimately, Marcus winds up with an unexpected fortune, but not from his delicious bread. Instead, he becomes the unlikely celebrity of Rome, leading to a new craze, Baker's Combat, where baking and combat merge into a confusing yet entertaining spectacle of culinary creativity married to chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, in the grand arena of Roman life, we learn one thing for sure. Sometimes it takes a ropey loaf of bread to unite the masses against the tyranny of bad taste. So, what's the takeaway? In Rome, it's always best to keep your sword sharp, your dough fluffier, and your competitors a little below, because in this town, it's either feast or famine. Fade in on the Roman Colosseum, 80 AD. The sun blazes down on an audience so excited they could probably reenact a gladiatorial battle just by jostling for their seats. The smell of sweat, popcorn, or whatever served as their snack, and ambition hangs heavily in the air. Today's menu? A glorious feast dedicated to the might of the Roman Empire. Roasted boar, honey-glazed figs, and a potentially disastrous dish of fermented fish sauce, or, as the Romans called it, garum. Yes, garum. This ancient condiment served blacks, whites, and angry Romans alike, and was squeezed from the sun-dried guts of fish. The perfect condiment to make an unsuspecting citizen question their life choices. Our protagonist today? Gaius, a fresh gladiator with dreams of fame, adoration, and not ending up splattered on the arena floor. But before he can even think of flexing his muscles against a lion, he's faced with the gluttonous challenge of garum-soaked delights meant to fuel his strength. He stands, one foot deep in gravy and the other in existential dread, as the aroma wafts through the dampness of the Colosseum, with spectators eagerly awaiting their dose of carnage and calories. Meanwhile, the loud clang of armor blends with the indecipherable commentary of the announcer, and in this corner, weighing in at who knows what, our first competitor, a Roman sand pilot, and in the opposite corner, a regular guy. But it's not just meat being grilled in Rome. The locals have serious superstitions about garum. They believe if it isn't made from fish caught at the perfect phase of the moon, disaster is imminent. Gaius sweats bullets like a fountain, wondering if he's about to dine with the gods or be the first guy to pass out from bad sauce on an arena day. Chaos ensues during dinner prep, as conflicting opinions on the garum recipe cause a strife among the cooks. One insists on upgrading the recipe with spices from far-off lands only Zeus himself could afford. Another swears that the secret ingredient is just whatever fell behind the kitchen stove last week. But no amount of culinary disagreement can quell the rising tension as a cook slips on a spilled bowl of garum, somersaulting comically into a pile of stale bread and cries of, "Not my sauce." In the climactic moment, Gaius bites into a piece of garum-tainted steak, his fate sealed by one brave, foolhardy thought: how bad can it be? Carnage strikes at the first gulp, but not the gut-wrenching horror he expected. Instead, he finds himself transformed, becoming the first-ever gladiator to arm wrestle a lion after chugging down a gallon of questionable garum. It's gladiatorial magic. The crowd erupts, both horrified and amused that a man whose life flashed before his eyes manages to not only triumph, but twirl victoriously through the vomit of his own bravery. Cut to the after-credits scene with Gaius sitting atop a pile of triumphant spoils, giving a victory toast with a goblet of garum, only to spit it out in horrified realization. In retrospect, historians claim the success of garum actually contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire, as citizens realized life was too short for sour fish guts. In the end, what's the lesson here? Always check the expiration date on your culinary dreams, especially when it involves fish under the full moon, or you might end up as fish food in a whole new way. Picture this: Rome, 80 AD, at the lavish banquet hall of Emperor Nero. A grand evening is underway under flickering oil lamps, and the oppressive scent of mulled wine mixed with the unmistakable aroma of something unsettling. The background is filled with the strains of lyres and the thunderous snores of recent guests who easily passed out from either overindulgence or the lingering threat of being outvoted in their latest plot against the emperor. Our setting is replete with wisecracking senators, a tittering entourage, and a buffet that could make a modern-day food blogger weep with envy or horror. Tonight's highlight? A roasted peacock stuffed with live thrushes that chirp wildly, apparently to ensure patrons get their protein and entertainment in one go. What a feast! As the pompous guests lean over to admire the culinary spectacle, their eyes widen in delight, or perhaps horror, as Nero himself raises his goblet, his features lit by the warm glow of 1,000 candles. A little boisterous pre-dinner fun? Surely nothing could go wrong with dinner served by an emperor who once played the lyre while Rome burned, right? Ah, but therein lies the tension. You see, this isn't just a meal. It's a tightrope walk over the jagged edge of Roman superstitions. Food in ancient Rome had a reputation more slippery than Nero's ethics. Every dish had an unspoken ritual, a sense of foreboding attached. It demanded respect, revered even, unless you wanted a side of misfortune or a dose of vengeance from the nearby gods. As servants scurry around, one nearly pops into the display of stuffed thrushes, panicking like they just heard their life story. Our less-than-reliable culinary guides, the soothsayers, hinted at some ominous portents earlier in the week. A peculiar cloud formation, an emperor-killing dream, and a goat that ran away, all pointing towards culinary doom should the zesty sauce be too spicy. And so the guests are left wondering, will tonight's menu end in cheers or a frenzy of existential dread? In a comical twist, as Nero raises his own piece of poultry in a toast instead of an inspiring speech, he accidentally lets out a laughable squawk like one of the terrified thrushes. Some guests choke back giggles, but not the nobility who are now faced with the chilling realization this could be their last meal. After all, one wrong chew of a thrush could lead to molten lava flowing down from the heavens. Or worse, a posting to a distant retirement in Caledonia, where lunch is a 3-day-old haggis. The various guests get caught up in bizarre rituals. They start tossing herbs over their shoulders to ward off the cuisine spirits, should they even suspect the meal was prepared by someone with a murky past. The atmosphere explodes in whispers and conspiracies. One senator swears he saw the chef double-dipping his spatula into the cursed fig sauce. Meanwhile, another guest leans in conspiratorially and declares that the roasted peacock is missing its feather charm, as if bereft of a talisman, it could unleash gluttony or, more frightening, show up in a late-night horror movie. Fast forward to the moment of truth. Nero, amid raucous laughter and increasingly frantic guests, takes a bite of the peacock. The tent goes silent as he chews, his facial expressions a confusing mix of delight and terror. Is he mocking them from the afterlife? Will they all be turned into thrushes? Finally, with a hearty he declares it the best meal he's ever had. The entire hall erupts into cheers. The guests, relieved but questioning their life choices, wait for that final verdict. Panic subsides as they start heaping peacock upon their plates, oblivious to the imminent doom soon catching interest in their household affairs. Death by digestive fiasco. In a twist of historical irony, we learn just how crucial the menu was. So crucial, in fact, that the phrase "you are what you eat" would soon flip to "you are whatever you survive." But never fear, in the grand scheme of Roman justice and reflecting the beauty of it all, we take away one simple truth. never overthink roasted birds, because if you do, you might find yourself on the wrong side of the Emperor's next encore. So, what's the takeaway, dear viewer? If something feels wrong tucked into your dinner roll, it's probably time to munch on the bread and call it a night. Welcome to Rome, 54D, where the skies are blue, the columns are taller than your sense of self-worth, and the main course is about to literally take your breath away. In the shadow of the Colosseum, your typical Roman dinner features a banquet so lavish that your modern catering company would weep tears of inadequate soriculture. But be forewarned, not all that glitters on the platter is gilded honey. As we enter a grand dining hall fit for a senator with a serious craving for a Roman Colosseum of flavors, we're met with an olfactory assault that can only be described as a gastronomical crime scene. The air is thick with the scent of garum, the fermented fish sauce that makes even the most devoted foodies question their life choices. Add in the faint whiff of burnt offerings and incense burning like it's running from its own reputation, and you've got an atmosphere thick enough to choke even the hardiest of gladiators. At the head of the table sits Gaius, a senator whose waistline is rivaled only by his ambition. He's flanked by a group of slaves doing everything from holding wine goblets to praying that their next meal doesn't come from the same pot as Gaius's celebrated stuffed dormice, which reportedly came with a side of despair and potential for unscheduled trips to the underworld. Dinner rolls out in a grand fashion. First up, a platter of those adorable little dormice, fattened up for the occasion and stuffed with nuts and spices. Nothing screams luxury quite like a critically endangered rodent, spruced up with a drizzle of garum like it's the tomato sauce of the gods. But for Romans, food wasn't just about satiating a hunger. It was an opportunity to flaunt status and perhaps an unhealthy obsession with creativity, and possibly their last meal. Now enter the chaos of preparation. Each dish comes with a tale of suspicious rituals. The chefs whispering sacrilegious praises to the Roman pantheon, calling upon gods like Bacchus, the wine god, while sneaking in secret ingredients during a full moon, just in case the wrong alignment brings about culinary disaster. One chef even consults an astrologer because who wants their egg-based dish cursed by a misaligning Venus? And then there's the ceremonial cutting of the giant fish, an event more dramatic than a gladiatorial fight. It's here that Gaius uncovers the ultimate culinary conundrum, a massive, glittering fish that suddenly releases a cascade of glistening entrails across the table. A bit of a divine retribution, some might say. Guests gasp, specifically Lucius, an offense connoisseur known to faint at the sight of anything more gruesome than spilled wine. But the evening doesn't just stop there. Out comes the wine, ready for tasting. It's heavily spiced, perhaps a tad too spiced, like it's trying too hard to compensate for the potential for ejection from an aspiring senator's throat. What are the odds the wine will have more lead than vintage grape? Statistically speaking, quite high. Guests sip gingerly, not only exploring the flavors but also their impending mortality. Thus, as the chaos unfolds, with Gaius invading debates about what actually constitutes a culinary masterpiece over spilled fish guts, we find out he might have put too much faith in his legacy. The background chatter crescendos into a debate over whether too much garum can turn even the most mundane bread into a gastronomical hazard, the potential of which could rival even the fiercest of arena battles. Finally, amid the chaos and culinary turmoil, a philosophical realization dawns on this illustrious gathering. Perhaps dinners aren't merely events for sustenance, but rather deadly games of chance. After the evening's main act, Gaius rises to deliver a rousing toast, only to assert that tonight's fish was indeed from the waters of the Styx, and that only a true Roman would dare to dine on the brink of oblivion. The guests applaud with wine-soaked smiles, perhaps trying hard to ignore the revolting notion that their next meal could easily become their last. So, what did we learn from this culinary soiree in the Empire? In the world of ancient Rome, a banquet isn't about choosing the right pairing of wine with your food, but rather dodging gastronomical grenades and hoping the fish you just ingested doesn't have an added side of death. Welcome to the grand culinary battlefield of ancient Rome, where the year is 54 AD, and the local delicacies are as questionable as the political alliances. Here, outside of Pompeii, a bustling market filled with vendors hawking everything from overripe figs to questionable seafood is alive with the sounds of haggling, laughter, and that unique sound of a goat who probably just realized its fate. Breathe in that aroma, a delightful blend of sandalwood, fresh herbs, and an undertone of fermented fish sauce. Yes, that's right, garum, the condiment of champions, or rather, the condiment that champions didn't want to admit they liked. This glorified fish paste, made from the remains of prized fish left to rot under the sun, and very similar to what could happen at an office potluck, was the crux of every Roman feast, and today it would be the center of a gastronomical civil war. Enter our key players. Marcus, the ambitious chef with dreams larger than his toga, and Lucius, the snobbish Epicurean, who believes food is not just sustenance, but an art form best served with a delicate sprinkling of condescension. A mat of tension swirls between them as the crowd anticipates the ultimate showdown. A garum taste test that could either elevate Marcus to culinary glory or plunge him into a sea of stinky fish paste infamy. As the sun beats down, the vendors chant their garum praises, invoking the spirits of anchovies past. The rich and the poor alike gather round, because nothing brings Romans together like a good debate over whether the garum from Neapolis makes you feel invincible or just slightly nauseous. Tension spikes as Marcus unveils his secret garum recipe, a concoction that combines not just fish, but herbs, ancient grains, and a touch of wild imagination. But Lucius scoffs, insisting that true garum must be aged for at least 3 months for proper fermentation, or else risk being nothing more than gloop in a jar, a term he seems to have trademarked solely for moments like these. The crowd gasps. The stakes could not be higher. With an audience hanging on every verbal duel, they watch as Marcus scoops a generous dollop of his dubious creation onto a piece of stale bread. Time seems to slow, and the air thickens as Marcus prepares to sample his own shipment to purgatory. He takes a deep breath and devours the bite. The silence thickens, punctuated only by the distant sound of a trumpet player fumbling in panic, as if sensing the impending food catastrophe. And it's a twist no one saw coming. Instead of gagging, Marcus lights up like a Roman candle. "By Venus, it's delicious," he proclaims, his arms flailing like a Roman soldier about to charge. In this moment, he's graced by a divine revelation. the garum actually works. The crowd erupts in cheers, while Lucius, red with indignation, can only sputter protests about flavor profiles and civilian palates. As the dust settles from this culinary battle of wits, it becomes clear that garum, that misunderstood goo, might have just cemented Marcus as the new celebrity chef of Pompeii. For those curious about how dangerous food could be in ancient Rome, garum often required extensive quality checks, and let's just say it wasn't always the freshest catch. Always after a few too many, Romans likely debated whether they were tasting medieval delight or just praying to the gods not to question their choices. So what's the moral of this flavorful feud? In the end, remember, in the world of ancient Rome, if life gives you lemurs, just add garum and hope no one asks where your fish is from. As we bring our utterly ridiculous yet oddly enlightening romp through the annals of the Roman Empire to an end, let us take a moment to ponder the great cosmic joke that is humanity's delusion of control over our furry, feathered, and finned companions. Isn't it amusing that despite our best efforts to tame the wild beasts, we remain at their mercy? A paradox akin to a gladiator staring down a lion only to realize the lion is taking notes for a new comedy special. Yes, dear friends, even in our lofty pursuit of civilization, we have neglected to notice that animals have been perfecting their own strategies of vengeance throughout history, from vengeful house cats giving you just enough attention to keep you guessing about your superiority, to dogs who, given the slightest provocation, will patiently await the one time you forget to dry their paws after a wet walk. Let's not forget the legendary retaliation of the elephants during the Battle of Gaugamela. While Alexander thought his forces were conquering, what he got instead was a horn full of sass from the largest land mammal, leading to a rather rude awakening. Animals have been biding their time, insidiously planning their take-back campaigns ever since their ancestors watched humans try to ride them. And thus, in our quest for civilized dominance, we ought to recognize the important lesson lurking in plain sight. The dog isn't wagging his tail, he's winding up. So, next time you feel superior sitting on your couch, remember that beneath the wag of that tail lies a seasoned strategist biding his time, conceivably plotting a traumatic return to wild instincts if you dare cross the line and say the dreaded word, bath. In closing, as we laugh, reminisce, and perhaps squirm at our shared historic, animalistic follies, let's leave with the following thought echoing through the halls of your mind. The Romans may have built an empire that crumbled like a poorly made lemon tart, but history teaches us one vital truth. The path to civilization is paved with bad decisions, good ambitions, and a sprinkle of very, very irate cats.